What's going on, JT? Linux 2017. It's that time. It's kind of odd in a way because I'm looking at my notes, and when I was writing up my notes for what to talk about for this podcast, I quickly come to the realization I didn't do a lot with open source software or Linux as far as learning learning new software as much as trying to improve basic understanding of Linux and open source software and putting the information out. 2017 was really a big year for my music production and, working on mixing my music down and filling out SoundCloud or my clip.it. So I did a couple things with open source software that was new as far as learning new software, but plenty of it was mostly creating content about stuff I already knew about. Plenty of it before 2017. I'm not going to talk too much about the music because that's not what the title and the purpose of this podcast is. But the music was a big thing for 2017, and along with finishing college and getting into the workforce, the civilian workforce. But with the free open source software, the stuff that I did learn, it's a very short list for the most part. But I could start off with Planner. So there was a project management course I took in college, and the industry standard is, I think it's called Microsoft Project. Well, I'm running Linux, so my options were, when it came to, at least in the beginning, were to go to school to work on the Gantt chart and the different charts for project management. The PMP guys would know all of those. Anybody else probably wouldn't care. It was go to school to work on Microsoft Project, VPN into, and I wasn't doing any of that, or have somebody else do it, or you find a program where I could do it on Linux, because I don't like trying to figure out anything with Wine. Just not a big fan of tinkering with it. So I came across Planner, which was actually pre-installed on Linux distribution, Linux Korora, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But that was pre-installed for whatever reason. Oddly enough, I think it's a discontinued program as of today. I'm not sure. The last time I talked with the developers there, I think they said something about it being discontinued. I don't know. But even then, and I talked about it in a blog that I did for the college, 5 apps you didn't know you needed. We ended up using Gantt, which was some type of browser extension, I think, where it kind of connected into connected your accounts and your browser or whatever, which allowed us to work on things at the same time instead of me simply shifting it to somebody else. I could still be some type of involved. Along with that 5 apps you didn't know you needed that I did for college, I also did one that was evolving with open source software at the high school. And then I did one that was evolving with open source software at Syracuse University, which, the Syracuse University one, which is on my platform, on my blog, gololively.com, that brought in the totality of all the courses and how I use open source software to do certain projects. Versus the one for the high-school was simply for the high-school courses or the IT courses that I took. So as of right now, we're at what? Planner, a project management app. That's the only place we're at, and I'm already a couple minutes in. The other program that I played with a little bit, not much, but a little bit, was FFmpeg, which is a command line program where you can make visualizations. Forget what the specific names of audio spectrum visualizations, I think, is the actual name of what they are. You hear the sound and it gets louder, the waves show certain waves and all that good stuff. When you're watching music videos that are really just wavelengths from the audio clip. That I learned a little bit about doing that in the command line, and I did a version of that in a video that I did for my instrumental called Dark 43, and that's a link along with the apps you didn't know you needed and the open source software at school links. Those will be in the descriptions below. So I played with that a little bit, and going into creating content, it was I did a video, short tutorial on UNetbootin, and then later on, I think about a month later, thanks to a buddy Mark at markexpeditions.blogspot.com, he introduced me to Etcher. Etcher being the same thing as UNetbootin as far as their goals, which is to help you create live disk of Linux distributions. So just imagine being able to download an image file to install a Linux operating system instead of having to actually install it. This program makes it very easy for you to, if you're not a person that wants to use a VM like VirtualBox or VMware, well, this program will make it very easy for you to put that image file on a USB drive so that you can restart your computer and boot from that USB drive, that flash drive with the operating system to see how it works, you being the primary user of your computer's resources. And so those are pretty cool. 2 short videos, and at some point in time, I don't remember when, but I think it's pre-installed on the Ubuntu Studio. At some point in time, I left f.lux or f.lux alone, which is, I think the easiest way to explain it is it's a program that changes the lighting of your computer screens during the nighttime so that it doesn't wear your eyes down at nighttime. Where, the contrast of being late at night kind of helps you to helps your eyes transition to preparing for going to sleep, while pulling out certain colors out of the screen, kind of gives it a warmer look, so to speak. That's available at Just Get Flux, F.lux, justgetflux.com. At some point in time, I left that alone because I've been using that on Windows for a few years ago, and I was just stuck with the pre-installed RedShift, which is, from what I understand, I think RedShift was made shortly after f.lux because f.lux was primarily Windows only. So RedShift does the same thing as f.lux, and just to put it out there, f.lux is now available on Linux. But at the time, RedShift served that purpose, and it's very bare bones. It's, I think at most, when you first touch the program, I think you put in your zip code or where you're at, and then it just works. It gets out of the way. Maybe it'll be in your taskbar, but it just works. And the only thing you really need to do is click on it and disable it for a certain amount of time, or let it do its auto thing. So at some point, I just let RedShift. I just started getting comfortable with that because it worked, and you can check that out at. It might be easy to just search RedShift Linux, but I think the developer's website is jonls.dk, JONLS, Juliet Oscar November Lima Sierra .dk, Delta Kilo /RedShift. So that's all of the free software, the free open source software that I learned or really paid much attention to, excluding the operating systems I'll get to in a minute. Very short list. But like I said, I did a lot of working on the basics. So I think at March I did a blog on directories Linux users should back up. Your home directory, and the user /share, the USR /share, a couple of those. And then a few months later, I did a blog on websites for IT training. And my favorites from the list were Cybrary.it and JKO, or Joint Knowledge Online. That's for the veterans, or even the active guys especially. There's good IT training up there. There's plenty. The government, a lot of the currently serving guys probably don't understand. There's plenty of good free IT training on those sites that are usually only used for boring and monotonous mandated training. Just throwing that out there. At some point, I actually did create, I think it was April, finally finished a blog and podcast that I did about a college course on Linux. Well, it was a system administration, and it was at one point at the beginning of class, during the beginning of the semester, there was an option where you choose what you would debate about at the end of the semester, and I, of course, chose the option to go between Linux Ubuntu server versus Windows server. That was fun. I'll put a link to that below, along with the pretty much the original presentation. I think names are stripped, even though I tried to do my best during that podcast to explain what I did and did not cover. So it doesn't seem as if I did everything, even though I will honestly say I was probably I was definitely the most into it. But that was more of a fanboy position than actually understanding the server OS. Anyways, operating systems, the Linux distros. Of course, I've already said it a few times, Ubuntu Studio that's my go-to. It's what I'm running right now. But at some point, I don't remember exactly when, because I never did an actual screencast on using it, but at some point I started using Linux Korora. I may be pronouncing that right. It's spelled Korora. And you can check that out at kororaproject.org. That's a Kilo Oscar, Romeo Alpha project.org. And the reason I wanted to try that is because it was Red Hat Fedora based. And I was thinking if I was able to get a job working on Linux, then I would be more likely needing to learn Yum and those specific, the commands specific to the Red Hat distribution versus the apt-gets and and I also just wanted to be able to finally try something that was Red Hat based, but I didn't want to try CentOS again. I think I did that for about a week. After my first few months trying Linux, when I was on Linux Mint, I tried CentOS and I said, let's see this KDE. It looks really nice, but why is my computer running so slow? My computer couldn't handle it. And I didn't like the way GNOME looked, I think. And I just couldn't navigate. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't as user-friendly to me as Linux Mint was. So, but Korora it's not as stable, I would say, as Linux Mint, but they do serve the same purpose, I would say. Korora is very much about the average user for the Fedora base of the Red Hat line of Linux distros. Again, that's what had Planner up there, the project management app, and quite a few other things. It just worked for the most part. Like I said, I'm saying this, I'm kind of tearing it down a bit by saying it's not as stable as I remember Linux Mint being, but you had your options between the different not window managers, but the DEs, the desktop environments, and of course I chose Cinnamon. And for the most part, it simply worked. The biggest gripe I had was trying to figure out how to install a lot of the programs that I was used to having on Ubuntu Studio. But that's a small gripe for me personally, not something that goes really too much against the developers, because I'm not the niche that they're going after. But I used that for a few months, and after getting to the point where I said, all right, well, I'm comfortable as I feel I need to be with this, because the commands are pretty much very similar regardless of the type of distro you're using. I went back to Ubuntu Ubuntu Studio again. And again, I've just been hanging out on that. But at some point, my buddy Mark and markexpeditions.blogspot.com, he released a very detailed, in-depth blog on trying Manjaro, which is based on Arch. And he made it sound really good, and I'd always been considering trying something based on Arch. So I tried it, and it just works. It works. It does everything it needs to do. I don't do too much with it. I browse, I'll play with certain installers. I'll play with the installer, see about browsing for apps. And that is one thing I do remember disliking about the update function with Korora. I think I just didn't understand too much of what was going on, but it wasn't as simple as I would have liked to see as far as trying to find the software that needed to be updated in just a small list. Manjaro, similar to the Ubuntu-based distros I use, very simple. You see the updates, you download them, you're done. And it's very clean interface. And I don't remember the DE I have on Manjaro, but I don't have too much to say about it. Like I said, it just works. I do have for some reason times where it just won't boot, oddly enough. I don't know how, but that's something I'll figure out sooner or later. So yeah, 2017, to wrap it up, it was mostly me working on music production. I learned Program Planner, which was a interesting project, a Microsoft project alternative. Play with FFmpeg. I learned Etcher, which is serves the same purpose as UNetbootin. I let RedShift do its thing versus clinging back to the known of f.lux or f.lux, and try to learn some basics and play with Linux Korora based on Red Hat, Fedora, pretty much the Fedora mint, so to speak, and clung back to my Ubuntu studio while, tinkering with the Manjaro and the Arch lane every once in a while. It was pretty interesting. It still feels, like I said, it still feels pretty fulfilling as far as just talking about everything I did with open source software, because using that Korora at least gave me some comfort within Fedora-based distros, even though at some point in time I may need to tinker with the Yum type stuff again. But if so, I'm pretty sure that would likely be because I'm at work. I'm working somewhere that I'm required to work with it. But as of now, I don't see a reason to worry too much about it. Manjaro's pretty interesting to use. I'm not sure. I still wouldn't consider it to be the first recommendation to a new Linux user, but it is still interesting. But that's mostly because I don't have haven't done too much with it myself as far as having issues with it. But that was 2017 for open source software and Linux. That's Linux 2017. 2018, I'm not quite sure how much it's going to change. Not quite sure how much more learning I'll be doing. I do have some content that I said I would do last year that I didn't, such as the How to Linux playlist, which is pretty much an empty link on YouTube as of right now. So that is still in the works. I do still have to draft, which I talked about on my most recent blog at the time of this recording, my plans for 2018. So that is something that's in the works. The draft, like I said, the draft is still there. But thanks for listening. Thanks for checking out the podcast. And I'm not sure where you'll be listening to this, but you do have options. I don't put my podcast on SoundCloud anymore because it takes up so much free hours, but this is on YouTube. It'll be on my blog, and it will be on my iTunes link, which my iTunes link will be on the website, on the blog, somewhere there. So again, thanks for listening. Feel free to shoot me any information you may have on anything I said. Again, the links will be down below for everything I talked about. Take care. Go live lively.